All
It's
right. I
confirming.
apologize for the delay. There was some bit of technical issues. All right. So I'll just quickly go through. I think Lake Chivero was designated a national park in 1952, and it got recreational park status in 1975. So now we want you to have an appreciation and understand what it is that we're talking about. So this is an important bird life area as well, and it was designated a Ramsar site, as I had mentioned earlier, in January of 2018. So the importance of this lake is it supports a diverse range of activities. It supports tourism. It supports biological diversity. It supports sport fishing, as well as irrigation for the agricultural areas that surround us. However, you notice that from my figures there, the depth of Lake Chivero is reduced. When it was created, if you notice, the demo was 400, it's still 400, but the original depth was 27 meters. And this is now declined to about 20.7. So my colleague will shed more light about the investigations and the assessments that we did pertaining to the level of siltation. Then you also notice that in terms of the pollution I'd mentioned earlier, we having about 265 megaliters of partially treated sewage being discharged in the lake on a daily basis. And then now, coupled with the current climate, this is a significant effect on our biodiversity. I'll dwell more into this later in the presentation. So from the megaliters I've mentioned, imagine we're looking at around 96,000 megaliters of partially treated sewage that is getting into the dam on an annual basis. So another issue, you notice Lake Chivero being close to Harare, it's surrounded by residential areas. And unfortunately, slowly because of this changing and expanding land use, the park is slowly becoming an island. And most of the wetland buffer zones that once filtered pollution before it reached the lake no longer exist. So now I want to look at the crisis in the making, where we're coming from, what's been happening. So you notice that I think in the media it was widely talked about pertaining the death of the rhino. But unknown to many, this is not the first time we've lost rhino. However, the reasons for the losses have been a bit different. In 2013, we lost 3 white rhino to Clostridial infection. So this was directly linked to pollution, as these rhinos consumed the bacteria through consuming water hyacinth on the edges of the lake. We had 1 rhino, though, that survived because we managed to treat this rhino. So Clostridial is a type of infection, it's a bacterial infection. So fortunately, there is a vaccine for it. So from 2019, the rhino in Lake Chivero have been on a vaccination program where we'd vaccinate them every 2 years against this infection. And this has worked. We had not reported any rhino death ever since 2019 as a result of Clostridial infection. Then in around the season 2023-2024, we had below average rainfall season. So we received very little rainfall in the park. And as a result, this reduced the dilution capacity. And worsened the situation as well. The temperature, this accelerated the proliferation of the algae. So algae, I'll talk more about it for those who don't understand, so that you also have an idea of what we're talking about. Then in 2024, around November, that is when the crisis then deepened. That's when we lost the 4 rhino in a very short space of time. It was around end of November, early December. It was a definitive diagnosis that it was cyanobacteria toxicosis. I'll explain more about the toxicosis part of the cyanobacteria. And in the same month as well, we also had significant fish kill events In a single event, we had one that we lost 3 to 4 tons of fish. Because of this, we had to translocate our rhino from Lake Chivero to a safer location. The cause of death now, this crisis was cyanobacteria. Unlike Clostridial, cyanobacteria, because of the toxic nature of it, the toxins it produces are not biological in nature. So I'll explain more about it. Then, as a response, later in the year 2025, we launched effective microorganism biological cleanup trial, where we're trying to decontaminate the lake water using biological solutions. This has shown very positive results. We'll share the results of the trials as well for your appreciation. But as the crisis worsened, we also noted that around October 2025, there were significant death of birds, and this was mostly in our area that we call Tiger Bay. And this as well, we confirmed that it was cyanobacteria toxicosis. Sorry, just a moment. Okay, now just to have an appreciation of the numbers there. So when we lost the animals, we did carry out some water tests from the areas that the animals had died. So what was of interest was the animals were not dying very far from the water point. So what was killing the animals was so fast acting that the animal could not get far from from the point of contact. So these are just some of the water samples that we collected from 3 of the sites that we had the most wildlife mortalities. So you see, and there was positive detection of fecal coliforms. Nitrates were very high. There was also presence of manganese, presence of mercury. Then we also noted that there was cyanobacteria, but there was the toxins that are produced by the cyanobacteria. These are what we call Microcystis aeruginosa. It's a species of the cyanobacteria, and this species produces toxins. So the toxins are not biological in nature. As such, they cannot be treated by antibacterials or antibiotics. And these were detected to have been too numerous to count in sites 1 and 3, which is the Tiger Bay area and the creek area. The creek area is where we lost most of our rhino. The Tiger Bay, that's where we had most of the birds dying, as well as zebra. And all sites as well tested positive for E. coli. This was sites where water was tested from the lake. So now, going into the cyanobacteria, just so that we know more about what it is that I keep referring to as cyanobacteria. So we do have a very serious cyanobacteria bloom problem in Lake Chivero. So what we're dealing with here, what cyanobacteria is about three known species that are. There is Microcystis aeruginosa. You also have the Anabima. You also have Spirulina species. These are known to be producers of hepatotoxins, especially microcystins. So microcystins are the ones that we found positive in most of the sites that we tested in Lake Chivero. So these are known to cause severe and rapid liver damage in animals, mammals, and birds. And these are in line with what we found from the water sample tests and from the postmortems. So how it kills wildlife is when the animals drink this water in an area where there is the microcystis bloom. These are absorbed through the intestinal tract into their bloodstream. And then there is severe hepatic necrosis, which is liver cells are destroyed rapidly. Then death typically occurs ideally within 24 to 48 hours. There is no antidote that is known currently for cyanobacterial toxicosis. However, we noted that in our animals, death was occurring more or less immediately, not necessarily immediately, but in less than 24 hours. Because even for the birds, I think we also go to that. They didn't have enough time to fly away. All of them died where they drank the water. So the postmortems that we carried out for the rhino all showed severe hepatic necrosis, and there was presence of microcystins in the tissue samples. The stomach contents of the birds as well was entirely green. So now for Chivero, why it favors these blooms? You see, it's because from the water samples I'd shown you earlier, it's because of the overload in nutrients. They are like fertilizer for the algae. The algae is what we're calling cyanobacteria. Some refer to it as blue-green algae. Then climate as well, below average rainfall, elevated temperature, all these are ideal for the blooms condition. Wind pattern, however, had an effect in that because of the wind pattern and the geology of the lake, most of the algae was blown towards the south bank part of the park. That is why most of the effects were felt on that side. So for those who are not familiar with Lake Chivero, this is how the lake looks like. So you notice, if you can follow my mouse there, where you see most of the concentration of the yellow circles here, these are indicating areas affected by the algae blooms, which is the cyanobacteria. So this is our Tiger Bay area, and the Harare Intake Tower is also found around this part. So this part here where I'm moving with my mouse, this is the South Bank area. The creek area at the bottom is where we also lost most of the rhino, as well as this part near the mooring point. You see that the northern part was also affected. However, most mortalities were recorded on the southern part because that is also where our game park is located. So are you still with me?
Yes. Yes, we're here.
Yes. All right. Just checking, eh? I hope I'm not choking you too much. So now just to have an appreciation of what we're talking about when we're talking about algae blooms. So this is how the water looked like in Lake Chivero around December 2024, and this is also how it looked in 2025, most part of 2025, and most part early this year as well. So you notice that this was an aerial photography I took from a helicopter showing one of the bays. This is one bay in Lake Chivero we call mooring area. Here we had some wildebeest dying as well, and a couple of fish eagles that we picked around this area. So you can see the water is visibly green, but then you see the concentration of the green changes as you get closer to the shore. This is because everything is being pushed to the sides there. The bottom part here where you see the purple-like part here, this is also algae, but now concentrated, and it has become thick to form a layer. This is in Tiger Bay area, such that when you pluck it out, some of it is also fecal matter that has compressed there, because Tiger Bay, because of the geology that I'd mentioned, as the wind moves and because of the river structure underneath there, most of the deposits are deposited in Tiger Bay. So it's the most affected bay. Then on my right, you just see the green there, even as you're moving the engine of the boat. That is, we were calling it Astra paint. Sorry, my slides are taking a bit long to move there. All right. So now the scientific proof. Here are the lab results from the postmortems that we did on some of the animals. So you see that it was positive for microcystis species. And then you also see that for the rhino, they showed a massive hepatic necrosis and hemorrhaging. And then the spleen also showed that it was congested. And for the zebra, there was also effects on the lungs. There was severe alveolar edema, and the bronchioles were filled with fluid. So, as I mentioned earlier, I also noted that the toxins, cyanobacteria toxins, affect the liver mostly, and they can also affect the lungs. So, most of our animals were showing signs of distress. The lungs were affected, the liver was affected, and some of them, even the intestines as well, were being affected. So, death was unavoidable. So, from the microscopic appearances of the water as well, and some of the PCR results that we did, we found cyanobacteria toxicosis as a positive diagnosis. However, if you remember, I mentioned about Clostridial uh, bacteria earlier on. From the samples that we did and the postmortems we did, it was negative for Clostridial. So this time around, the cause of death was not Clostridial, but rather cyanobacteria, which is an even more worrisome cause of death because of its nature and then the unavailability of vaccines or treatment for it. So, with the above, unless the urban pollution of the Manyame River and the general catchment of Lake Chivero is reduced, similar mortality events are likely to occur and in the lake, and they're still ongoing. So these are just some of the mortalities we had in November that we had recorded in November alone. Um, in Lake Chivero, that is the South Bank area alone. So some of the emergency responses we took, we had a rhino that died and it had a young calf. It was still too young for it to survive on its own. So we had to send it to an orphanage where it has been taken care of, where it can be fed supplement milk. And I'm happy to report that it's doing well and it's grown very well. So at least there's that one survival from the crisis. Unfortunately, the other four rhinos that were affected died. The remaining population, we had to remove it and translocate it outside of Chivero to a safer game park to avoid further death, as there was nothing that we could do to prevent further death. Though we did give some antibiotic treatment, penicillin, to some four rhinos where we had seen having signs of nasal discharge, just to try and eliminate some microbial infections. Then, ever since then as well, because of this, the increased risk even to public health, there was a fish ban that was imposed, banning of fishing activities from November 2024. This is still in place. And we've also been doing some joint water testing with health and fish sample testing um, for Chivero, just to also see the extent of the problem and see if there are any changes. So as ZimParks, because our animals, the major issue was that they were drinking from this polluted lake. So we then established some inland water points where we had just to try and provide alternative sources of clean water. And fortunately, the animals are taking to this. However, they're still wild animals, so you can't really prevent them from accessing the lake. So I'm sorry this is a bit graphical, and the next one is going to be a bit disturbing. Uh, these are some of the rhinos that we lost during the crisis. And to date, we've reported over 80 mortalities of these four are rhinos, and it is definitely 100% confirmed that it was because of direct the cause of death was the pollution of Lake Chivero. And then we also lost some fish eagle, plenty of fish eagle, quite honestly. In 2024 and 2025, the animal species that were being affected by this level of pollution were rhino, zebra, fish eagle, and a few wildebeest. However, going on to 2025, we've had new species now being affected by the water in Lake Chivero. I'll also talk about those new species later on. And from the fish eagle, you can notice in the picture that I've shown you there, these are not fish eagle. The one at the top, that's a whistling duck. We lost more than 12 of these in a single event at the Tiger Bay area. We're picking them along the shore. These are gray heron. We also lost more than 20 of them as well in a single event. So the situation is critical. So these are just some of the species that are being affected. It, however, turns out that some animal species are not being directly affected by the pollution. I think you can notice from the fish eagle there, the mouth, the beak is green. So this is the case with most of the animals that we pick up. You can evidently see that it had contact with the algae before it died. So the fish eagle get exposed when they go hunting for the fish, and then they also consume the fish. But the main issue is the contact with the water, and also when they go and drink the water. Then with the heron there, you can also see the mouth is also green and the feet are also green. And now these are for baboons. So the most, what I was talking about is now we're looking at an expanding impact where new species are now being affected that were not being affected initially. I also worry though. I laugh though it's not funny, but with how closely we are related to baboons, you tend to wonder. So baboons, this is just some of the histopathology that we did, and I've inserted a water commentary there that were given from the water test that we did. You see that the baboon showed signs of stress. The lungs had moderate congestion. So these are just some pictures from the organs that we're taking from the baboons. The most fascinating thing, though, was that the baboons, it was as though the effects of the toxins were so sudden and immediate that they fell out of the trees and died. So they were falling from the trees and died. And all 7 baboons that died in the same area were all within 5 meters, 4 meters from each other, and they were less than 100 meters from the contaminated water point. That is where we then took these water samples that were then tested. But again, from the effects that we've seen of cyanobacteria, it was also consistent with the severe toxic stress of the liver, and also you see the middle picture with the gloves there. These are the stomach contents. There was heavy stomach ulcer, stomach bleeding. It was a bleeding ulcer. And then on the side there, you see the liver with also some effects there and edema. Then from the expert that had done the water testing, you see because of the colonies and counts that they noted were positive for microcysis, which are toxins from, which is a species of cyanobacteria I'd mentioned earlier that produces toxins. They found positive for that. And then this was a high risk threshold, which exceeded the threshold guidelines. And from the comment, it was placing water firmly in that area as in the category of do not allow wildlife to drink category, do not allow livestock, which also applies to wildlife, do not drink category. And then you also notice that there was a very high levels of phosphates, ammonia, and the level that's in on the sites and the blooms as well. I expected to be toxic to men, livestock, and wildlife. So now the satellite data I showed you initially, this is what I was trying to show you with the wind and how it affects the bloom concentration on the South Bank area. So as a result, we've implemented some biological cleanup initiatives where we're making use of effective microorganisms. So Goza will shed more light on the trials that we were doing using these organisms to clean up the water and get rid of the cyanobacteria. The results are quite promising. So you shed more light on that so that you can have an appreciation. So now the threat, we'll now look at the broader impact beyond park boundary, because this does not only affect Lake Chivero, it also affects Harare citizens, it affects northern citizens, because you notice that the fish in this lake are also um, a source of livelihood for many people around. And the fish ban is also affected livelihoods. And the lack of recreational activity is also affected tourism around this park. But maybe important to note, the Chivero is not closed. What has only been closed are fishing activities. Then you see that some of the tests we did, we saw that some of the fish were harboring E. coli and Vibrio cholerae and Salmonella. And this is what then also led to the ban in the fish, because of what was found to be contained by the fish because of the water that they're exposed to. There were also heavy metals that were also found, like mercury, cadmium. These were found in fish tissue samples. So all these threaten human health, and the contamination of the water is a huge concern, since Lake Chivero is the main water source for Harare. So you see the root causes of these issues. It's a multiple failure points. We have the city councils were discharging raw sewage. There's inadequate treatment infrastructure. You also see that we have agricultural runoff, so fertilizers, phosphates and all those, they find their way to the lake. And as I mentioned earlier, with the urban encroachment that has now rendered Chivero more or less an island, and also affecting the wetlands which acted as buffers, and these no longer exist, or the residential development. This has had a significant impact on the siltation levels and effect on the wetlands that would have been the points which would filter some of the pollution before it got into the lake. We also have industrial effluent, a lot of industries that are coming up in the watershed, and these raise a lot of concern with heavy metal contamination as well, because in the water we've also detected levels that exceed the World Health Organization limits. Then obviously the climate variability that we experience in the years 2023 and 2024 and the rising temperatures have also had an effect. So with all this, surely the lake cannot heal faster. It can't at this moment heal faster than the rate at which it is being recontaminated. So really something needs to be done. So you see, I just thought maybe we'll just look at some of the tourism numbers with how visitors have also been affected by this crisis. It's not only affecting the ecosystems, it's also affecting uh, revenue, income, and all that. You see my table in blue there. Those the records from 2025, and then the ones in orange are records from 2024. So you see there's already been a decline in the number of visitors that have come to the lake, which translate to direct revenue lost because of this, because of the pollution, because of the ban on fishing, because most people come to Chivero to fish or boating for fishing. Boating is still open, however, because fishing is banned for now, then that has a direct effect on tourism. So we've lost over 30% in revenue over the past 2 years. So how we've responded as well to the crisis, you see that some of them I'd mentioned where we'd moved the rhinos, and also we're doing advanced training and various monitoring techniques so that we can be able to detect this crisis earlier before it happens, better mortality records, better area monitoring, better animal health monitoring, which has also been influential when we also noted that our zebra were being affected by ringworms, which is directly linked as well to the water, and they were losing body condition. Then there's also scientific monitoring that we've also been doing, like multi-site water quality testing, as well as partnerships with some independent organization and institutions. Then the effective microorganism trial that we're currently doing. We completed it, but now moving on to the next phase. In multiple stakeholder actions, we've had joint collaboration with other government institute and private sector to try and come together and see the best way forward in trying to address this situation. So what is currently working? We've seen that some of the water points we've put in place are helping to some extent, but obviously the animals will keep going to drink from the lake. And also the effective microorganisms we've been doing are showing genuine promise. Then the translocation definitely helped because where the rhinos are now, they are doing very well, and we've had a couple of new births ever since the translocation. However, our interventions alone as ZimParks are not enough to address this because we're looking at more than 260 megaliters coming in on a daily basis, and then alone we cannot substitute for all the multiple failure points. There is need for source level interventions. So we need to stop managing the symptoms and deal with the disease. So I would highly recommend in some of these are immediate actions, which include water quality clearance. So this remains high as a risk to public health. So tests are currently being done. We'll keep monitoring, and then also adding more boreholes and adding water points within the park just to provide alternative sources of drinking water for the wildlife, and also deploying real-time monitoring devices, as these will help to detect changes before the situation becomes critical. So another immediate intervention will be obviously scaling up the EMs that we're talking about. You'll hear more about this as well from my colleague. So, however, long term definitely will have to be sewage treatment before discharge in the lake, because this has also been the major impact and major cause of the current situation. And even looking at alternatives like contracted wetlands, just to try and help with the destruction of wetlands that has already been happening. Uh, then it's highly recommended that there is some land use revision within a 10-kilometer radius of the Chivero Ramsar site, and ideally a kilometer buffer zone around the protected area. A buffer zone, what it is basically, it's an area of unused, unoccupied area that is left natural, that acts as a buffer between development or other commercial activity and the protected area. These are very vital in trying to protect and conserve its integrity. Then there is need definitely for enforcement of pollution controls in the Manyami catchment. These definitely will go a long way. So Chivero definitely is not lost. However, the window is closing and we need to act fast. There needs to be we need to restore, we need to see Chivero go back to its former glory, and would like to see the rhinos come back. We need to hold polluters accountable. We need to invest in a lot of infrastructure to help us regain our status as as the recognized Ramsar site. We're still a Ramsar site, but we do not want to risk losing that status. Then we need to continuously monitor and also continuously expand our research and document these findings as they help inform us of the way forward. We really need to work together and see how best we can do, because for every animal that we've lost, every rhino, every ton of fish killed, every bird and animal that dies, these are not just statistics. Don't look at them as just statistics. But this is the lake. This is Lake Chivero sending us a very clear message. Thank you very much. I think I'll leave to Goza to continue.
Thank you so much, Diana. And I think at the end we'll give a room for questions so that people ask questions. Let me try to. think that they are working on me getting over. Take control.
So
Maybe
as
should I
David,
try and
okay, sorry, I just wanted to say that whilst David is trying to connect, if everyone can send their questions in the chat box, and whilst he presents, Diana, you can respond to the questions, just so we try to manage time. We started a bit late, but to understand that this is a very critical discussion that we're having. So we can try to have the questions being responded to in the chat box whilst David responds. And then when we get to the end of the session, we can revisit and discuss what we feel needs to be looked at in depth. But even if the suggestions, please do bring them, throw them in the chat box. Thank you.
So basically, I think Diana has done a lot and said a lot, and she has given us the background of Chivero, and I'm going to take over and talk about the aquatic side. And is everyone hearing me?
yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to talk about the aquatic ecosystem itself, and I'll talk more about the fish and the water. And I think Diana has explained a lot about water, which will just make it easy for me to rush through as we wait for the IT to give me the control. I think very soon it will be ready.
So Goza, I've just shared with my screen. I don't know if you can see your presentation now.
No.
Okay, let me try and share with my screen. Apologies for the delay. Let me see if I can.
Thank you, Diana. Now I can see it.
Most
Can I
welcome.
proceed?
Yes.
Right. Thank you. My name is David Goza. I think I've mentioned that, and I'm going to talk about the aquatic system as we look at this topic of assessing ecosystem health and conservation interventions. Next slide, madam. So in brief, a brief background on Lake Chivero, the fish species trend in Chivero. We are saying at current position, we have got 5 key species associated with fisheries at Lake Chivero. As of today, these are the species which we can find in the lake, though it's more dominant of our own Niloticus, which is an invasive species. But looking back on our history, shows that 28 to 23 species were noted during post-lake Chivero's impoundment, and at least 14 prominent fish species were recorded during that period, and most of them they were contributing much in the fisheries industry. Next, madam. Looking at the species composition as from 1975 to 2024, we are seeing that we had a lot of fish species which were there, and as the years were progressing, we can notice that around 2000, that's when we lost most of the species here, with all macraker being dominant from 1975 up to 2001, and Ornitholyticus taking over, as it is an invasive species and it can tolerate any pollution to a certain extent, though. But other species like H. vitatatas, they could not tolerate the pollution. If we look well on the water pollution history, we can see that as we were progressing from 1975 going onwards to 2000, the pollution was increasing as the population was increasing, and our systems were not able to contain the pollution which was coming, and that's when we started to have the decline in our species composition. Madam. And this chart shows the Lake Chivero fish catches using both our research data and also the fishers data. As we can see that from 1974 going to 2000, around 2005, the catches were very high, possibly because during that period we were also using the cyanide. It was, by that time, it was legal to use cyanide, and then later on, around 2004, 2005, it was banned because it was causing havoc in the industry, and they were now using the gill nets. And as we can see, the catches are decreasing up to the current situation which we have in 2024, where we are seeing there is a decline in the catches, because we are saying here since 1975 up to around 2005, we're having a diversity. So many species were there, and they could catch a diversity of them. And then after that period, we're having only Ornitholyticus, which was dominating, and the species like species which were not contributing much on the industry, like
Sorry, Goza, your mic is muted.
Sorry on that. I was trying to say that if we look at our chart, we can see that the catches started to decline around 2000, going downward. And if we look backward, the species during that period we're having, if you recall the chart which I showed you, it showed that we had diversity in the lake, and later on we're having few species, around the 4 or 5 species were being caught by that period. And even today, depending on 5 species, and on all those 5 species, Ornitholyticus is the one which is favorable on the market. And sorry, next slide. Yes. So we are saying there are 5 key species which are now associated with the fisheries, and we have got some threats which are affecting the fisheries industry. Since we mentioned that the lake is now a source of livelihood for the people who are around the lake, so we are saying their industry was affected due to these threats like climate change, contamination, invasive species, and biodiversity loss, pollution, unsustainable fishing practice, and habitat destruction. And there are 3 main aspects to be tackled with, which include water quality management, habitat restoration, and managing fish populations, managing invasive species, and stakeholders. And when you are looking at managing invasive species, we are talking about invasive species like water hyacinth. And when we look at habitat management, we are looking at the lake itself, as we are talking about the pollution crisis. And looking at the pollution crisis, I think Diana has mentioned a lot about this pollution crisis. Can you go to the next one? Next slide, madam. Yes, on pollution, and we are saying around 96 to 98 billion liters of sewage is being poured into the lake, and there is need for some solutions. And looking at it, in 2024, there was this crisis which made a lot of noise in our country, where we had this lake like algae bloom, which covered the water, and it reduced the oxygen in the water, which led to the death of fish species. And we are saying that estimated tons is around 3 to 4 tons, and mostly it was Ornitholyticus which was affected. Next slide, madam. And this map, as Diana illustrated on this map, I'm trying to show you that, as you can see, the most affected, where we are having those yellow dots or circles, these were most affected areas. And on these most affected areas, we are saying these are the breeding zones of the fish species. And also, these are the parts where we are having the fisheries using as for their gill nets. And these were the areas which were the fishing. And when the areas were affected, we moved on to stop or to ban temporarily to ban fish farming, fish harvesting, because these areas were much affected, and it also affected the breeding of our species there, as they were dying, and these were the breeding sites. So most of these fish species were dying. And looking at the statistics which we had, most of the breeding stock was affected, though the small ones were also affected, but we had a lot of the breeding stock affected. Was that area which were those areas which were much affected, these were the breeding sites, where when the water level was low, we could see also the nests around those areas, which also indicates that these were the breeding sites. Next, Diana. And we are now talking on habitat destruction. The lake's maximum depth reduced from 27 meters, which was there during the period when the lake was constructed, and it was reduced to 20.7 meters. This is due to siltation. We are saying there is a lot of siltation which is happening. Not only siltation, but we are also considering accumulation of debris from also contributing to the reduction in the depth of the lake. And there's poor farming methods and land use changes resulting in siltation. I think Diana mentioned about the villages and also urbanization, which is happening around the lake. And there is inappropriate settlement. We have got the appropriate and the inappropriate settlements which are happening around the lake. And there is also gully erosion, which is noted around the wetland. Air grounds and maximum water levels are changing in the negative side. And there is also accumulation of debris, also contributing to a lot of sewage discharge into the lake. We are saying that as this sewage continues to be discharged into the lake, there is no any way it is going to move out of this lake, since like this year we're expecting the lake to spill over, but we could not get much rainfall as expected, and it's still around 91, 92%, which shows that this year we are not going to have any spillover, which shows that we are going to continue having the same debris in the lake. During previous years, when we were having this spillage, some of the sewage were going on the other side of the lake, but nowadays, because there is no spillage which is going to happen, because the water is around 90, and we are not expecting any rainfall sooner. So it means that we are going to be affected, and the sewage is going to be there, and there is need for solution for us to deal with this pollution. Next. Managing fish population. At Lake Chivero, we have got some ponds which we have, and we are trying to control what is there. As I mentioned before, that we have lost species during the years from 1975 up to date. And at Lake Chivero, we are trying, at Lake Chivero Fisheries Research Institute, we are trying to preserve the indigenous genes which we have through breeding of indigenous species. For now, we have got four breeding fish species which we have, and we are looking forward to stock other indigenous species at Lake Chivero. And we have tried to restock the lake the previous years, which is 24, 25, and 2025. And because of this pollution, I don't think we succeeded in restocking the lake. As we are doing the research, we are noticing that there is no any species which is being caught on our nets. So it means possibly we could not achieve what we wanted to achieve. Most of the species which we have, most of our indigenous species, they cannot tolerate the level of pollution which is in the lake. So possibly, if we come up with a solution, then we can restock the breeds, the species which we have. We are trying to promote aquaculture project that's ponds, which we are going around encouraging people so that we reduce pressure on the lake, so that when we open for fisheries, when they come back, less permits will be given or less permits will be operating. People will be relying on the ponds rather than relying on the lake. And there is real-time satellite water monitoring which is being done so that we keep on monitoring the water quality. There is temporary suspension of all fishing activities. I think Diana mentioned this. There is research on use of enzymes and microorganisms in the depollution of water, which I'm going to talk about on the next slides. Next. Now we want to talk about habitat restoration using the effective microorganisms, which are the EMs technology. Next. We're calling effective microorganisms. By definition, these are mixed cultures of beneficial or naturally occurring microorganisms applies as influence to increase microbial diversity in ecosystem such as soil, water, and air. There are microscopic life forms that exist everywhere in nature and play a critical role in maintaining ecological balance. They are also found in human body, in intestines, and also in the water. They are eco-friendly. There are 80 plus species which are combined for naturally occurring beneficial microbes. And we are saying they can be used for multi purposes, and they are used to balance the environment. Next. Origins and theoretical framework. We are saying this is something which was postulated by a Japanese agronomist in 1970s, and it has been used mostly in agriculture. I think people who are based in agriculture, they know about these microorganisms which they are using. And this agronomist was basing his principle on dominance. And he stated that there are three microbial categories which are positive microbials and negative. And then the option is a way you are saying the positive. We can use the positive to change the environment, to influence the environment, or we can use the negative. When the environment is showing negative impacts, then we can use the positive to change the environment to the positive. And then if we want to change the negative if we want to change the positive to a certain situation, we can use the negative. And then we can also have the optionist, which just take the situation which is at hand. They just follow the dominant group, align with the whatever side, positive or negative. And next, madam. EMs, when introduced, they are introduced in the water, soil, or organic waste as a microbial influent. And then they start to colonize the area. They colonize the area, and then they start to convert organic matter into plant available nutrients for more efficiently. And then the ecological equilibrium restored. They balance the ecosystem which is there, which we are saying here as we want to try it. We want to balance the situation in the lake. We want to remove the pollutants, and then we have a balanced ecosystem in the lake. Next. We as Lake Chivero, we did a trial procedure which was done at Lake Chivero Fisheries Research and Ornithology Center, and it was a 6-week controlled trial using 3 ponds and 3 small ponds, 3 big ponds and 3 small ponds, which were 3,700 liter each, filled with Lake Chivero's most polluted water, and then 5 brims were put in each and every pond so that we see the effects of the EMs. And the method, we sprayed activated EM solution even across pond surface. I think Diana showed us a table showing us the quantities which were used, and on frequency, it was done twice a week for the first 2 weeks, then weekly for 4 weeks. And baseline measurements were taken a week before treatment, and we measured BOD, COD, DO, total TSS nutrient levels, which are the nitrogen, phosphorus, and ammonia, cyanobacteria counts, E. coli, fecal coliforms, and total coliforms, microbial counts, so that we check as we progress to see if the EMs are working as expected. Next, madam. And this is just an illustration on the ponds which we were using. That's on the bigger one. The bigger picture is just the lake water, which was very dirty, polluted. And then these after 2 weeks is what we were noticing as we were proceeding. Next, madam. The basic treatments, I think Diana has mentioned about that. I think we can go to the next slide. And outstanding results, which she mentioned also, the cyanobacteria, it was eliminated before we sprayed with EMs. It was at 56 milligrams, and then after that, it was eliminated. The phosphates were reduced at 98%, ammonia reduced at 83%, dissolved oxygen, it increased times 2,000, and then total coliforms, they were cleared. E. coli, it was cleared. As we can see with the picture, this was just a picture which was showing the control and the other pod which we did put the EMs. Next. Strategic solutions. We are thinking that if permitted, we should move to the phase 2, where we need to use the EMs on the source point, where we would treat at the source point and would put an automated EM dosing system at 3 sewage treatment works. And with that, we would put them on the many 3 sewage treatment plants, which is FAO and Cobra, Zengeza. And then these are just, we were just looking at some calculation which can be used. We are not saying we are going to use that, but we are just putting on some measurements which can be put, let's say 14,400 liters EMs per day, treating 144 milliliters of sewage, which is what we're just approximating. And we are saying we can move to phase B, where we can also do the lateral point treatment. But we are saying we are going to put the EMs on the inflow points of the channels which inflows the water into the lake, which comes with the sewage, so that we treat it as it enters the lake, and that way it can ease our work rather than spraying them all over the lake. As the sewage comes into the water, it will be treated and then it will be sprayed all over the lake through the flow of water in the lake. Next strategy, next slide, madam. Thank you so much for listening. And we are saying that the science has proven it, and we are here, and the solution is ready. If resources permits, we can move on, and with approval from the high principles in our country, and also we are saying this is not the solution only. There are other solutions which we can come up with. There is the use of constructed wetlands, which can be used in cooperation with these EMs. There is use of grasses like vetiver grass, which can be used on reducing the pollution. Let's come up together and come up with better solutions so that we can treat our lake and it becomes a better lake for the humans and also for our biodiversity. Thank you so much. I give it over to Madam Diana.
Thank you, Goza. I think I'll hand it back to the facilitator, and you can let us know if there are questions that you need us to respond to.
Thank you so much, Diana and David, for that insightful presentation. And thank you very much for the great work that you guys continue to do. I saw a list of questions in our chat box. There's one question here, and it says, the impacts of the biological cleanup can also, well, is this a recommendation, Walter? maybe we can give you the floor briefly. Is this a recommendation? Walter Msako.
Thank you. No, it's a question. It's a question, not a recommendation. Where I'm just saying that, yes, they are doing the biological cleanup, but have you investigated some of the maybe downstream impacts or negative impact? Because remember, it's an ecosystem. Yes, it might solve one problem, but what about broadly speaking in terms of the ecosystem? Thank you.
Maybe I could respond to that.
Please go ahead.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Walter. So, as you noted, it's a trial. So when we're doing the trial, there were some issues that we're looking at as well. Effect on fish, whether it affects life, and we're testing periodically to see effects on oxygen demand. All those were assisting us to see whether it will have any effects. But however, I do understand your concerns. Anytime when we're working with biological controls, there are always concerns. So, however, that's why now, before we go to the lake-wide application, the idea is for the different stakeholders, scientists and stakeholders like you, it's important to get buy-in. When we're doing these trials, they'll also be as transparent as possible so that we actually see all the possible negatives if they. But from what we've done so far, and we've also researched from similar projects that were done using this product elsewhere, and the pros outweigh the cons. And the cons, to be quite honest, we don't even know if there are any yet. Because the good thing about it, you're using a concoction of good bacteria, which is already there. We already have it, but this has just been formulated and put into a one formula, and then it's that put into a natural environment. So there's nothing chemical, it's all natural. And then its sole purpose is it feeds on these nitrates, it consumes these heavy metals, it degrades the cyanobacteria. So that's the angle we're taking, but still, given that it's a trial we completed with positive result before lake-wide application, definitely there's need for multi-stakeholder buy-in, and we'll sit at the table and see what works, what are the possible impacts before anything can be done. I don't know. I hope if I've answered you.
Well, thank you for that one, Diana. Another question here for you. What is being done? I think this question, maybe we can put it to the floor. Maybe we might have people who might be involved in the solution to deal with the root problem of the challenges in Chivero, i.e., urban pollution, direct deposition of raw sewage and industrial waste. I think this one we can open to the floor, because I would like to believe Diana is probably on the receiving end. Is that correct, Diana?
Yes, that is very correct.
So if there's anyone maybe
we are
who's
also on the
supply
receiving end. Yes.
Yes. Would you want to speak to that, Diana?
I think let me let others comment, and then
Yeah.
I can comment later.
Sure. Is there anyone from our audience who would be willing to speak to that? What is being done to combat the root problem?
Hello.
Yes, Crispin, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. This is a problem that is going on for more than 30 years, 40 years. Everybody knows that the problem is the catchment. Harare, what's happening in Harare, the sewage, the runoff from the dump, the rubbish that we throw on the streets and everywhere. Basically, the problem is the catchment when it comes to Lake Chivero. And if you ask what is being done, I think you have to look at it on a historical basis, that basically, as a people, we have done very little to manage the situation. In the 70s, something was done because Lake Chivero started having this problem the moment it was created, because it sits basically downstream of Harare. In the 70s, they actually diverted a lot of the sewage to farmland. Yeah. And then that for a short while seemed to work. But eventually the population exploded in Harare, and that mitigation factor just fell apart, because even the capacity of our sewage work could not handle all those aspects. Then we talk about industrial development. As I said, the population exploded, and what not only the sewage but the industrial effluent, nearly all our effluent goes into our water systems. Whether you talk about effluent from the hospitals, effluent from our homes, effluent from our industries, is finding its way into Lake Chivero. Now, you can say we are basically doing very little. Yeah. And we can recommend the work that these guys, Parks guys, have done is very good, and we can give them a pom-pom. But the issue is, because of that historical basis, the next thing is, if we stop everything, let's say we go to zero in terms of the effluent that's going to Lake Chivero. The lake itself, I think Diana mentioned it, the lake itself will spend years recovering, because within itself it's got an heavy internal load of pollutants. So it's going to take years just to recover, even if we stop at zero. Now we are continually discharging into the lake, and we simply have to figure out a ways of either saying we are going to stop using this lake for, especially to provide water to residents, or we're going to come up with great treatment measures, the ones they are talking about. But I see that the EMs they are talking about, I don't know whether it will work at a large scale, like on a lake like that, maybe for water treatment. So in short, I will say that we haven't really moved to do what's supposed to be done. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Crispin. Now we only have about 10 more minutes, so we'll try and pack as many questions and responses within those 10 minutes. Lina, if you can share a minute, I see your hand was up. Would you like to speak to that as well? Lina, are you there? Lina. Okay. Maybe there's another question here. It says, does the fishing ban also apply to Darwindale? If not, what's the risk level with respect to Darwindale? Had we made it that far? Diana, David.
Okay, I can respond to that. There is no fish ban in Darwindale, Lake Manyame, but we are seeing some indication that there is pollution which is happening there. Because as I mentioned, that when our lake overspills, it throws its influence on the other side and it flows into Lake Manyame. So if you go to Manyame, the other side, which is the river, we can simply say the river mouth of Manyame, as it gets into Manyame Lake, it's polluted. And I think on the same note, I can also answer one of the questions which I saw there. There is something which we noticed with the plants which we have in the water, the aquatic plants. We have got oxygen weed. We used to have a lot of oxygen weed in Chivero, and now it's no longer seen in Chivero because it doesn't tolerate pollution. And if you go to Manyame, on that area where the Manyema River flows into Lake Manyame, there is less of oxygen weed, which is an indication that it's now polluted on that area. So there is pollution in Darwin, and it needs us to look into it before it gets to the situation which we have at the end at Chivero.
Well, thank you very much for that. There's another question here. Maybe let's give Ronald an opportunity. Ronald Chipere.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the very informative presentation from you, Gozo and Diana. I wanted to ask mainly because one of the contributing factors is industrial effluent. So I don't know if it's a question, but I want to find out the involvement of ZimParks in relation to environment and social impact assessments as a key stakeholder? How are you engaged, and are you part of um, the mitigation, part of the stakeholders that provide mitigation to some of the problems that are facing Lake Chivero, especially as it relates to industrial effluent? What is the role of national parks in the ASIA process, particularly in Harare? How have you been getting engaged as the major protected area that receives most of which is on the downflow of all the pollutants? And also, there's some question that was asked about what is being done. I know that for some industries that are being set up, they're having on-site sanitary systems like the ABR and mostly ABR for industry, which also helps to deal with the effluent. But I'm interested to know how Parks has been involved in environment and social impact assessments as a key stakeholder. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe allow me to speak to that one before I share with David and Diana. So Parks is involved with several stakeholders, and we've been fortunate enough to see a highly collaborative effort with regard to Lake Chivero, especially number one, its significance as a supplier of water to Harare and its international significance as a Ramsar wetland site and also an important bird area. And we've had meetings taking place regarding the catchment area. I think there was a meeting about a month and a half ago. Is that correct, David, Diana? I think not too long ago, there was a meeting.
Yes.
And discussions were around what can be done. And this was a multi-stakeholder meeting, which involved council officials, it involved industry, it involved people that are directly affected by the lake. So maybe to answer your question in brief, ZimParks is heavily involved in making sure that it plays a role in transforming this. Now, as far as specific or direct social impact assessments, I think those can be left to other organs of government as well, given that our area is really wildlife and by extension, environmental impact assessment in partnership with or with support from EMA. David, Diana, a minute or two.
Yeah, I think in a way you've just summarized it to say, yeah, we've been involved. We go to the stakeholders. We also give input on some of the drafts that are currently being done, especially the recent one with the ministry, with the Manyame Catchment stakeholders meeting, where we're doing a draft that would then be maybe help us with the way forward in terms of how to find solutions for Chivero. So we are involved, as Tammy was saying, in these forums. Other than that, unfortunately, when it comes to even when it pollution control or policing, our jurisdiction only ends with things that are within our mandate, like poaching and maybe legal entry or use of national parks areas. When it comes to pollution that is coming or effluent that is coming from outside the park boundary, we are limited in how much we can do in terms of enforcement. But however, in terms of input and being engaged for possible solutions, we've been actively engaging with other stakeholders.
Thanks, Diana. Nobesutu, your hand is up.
Very much for the very interesting presentations. This was a very interesting and engaging session in our webinar series. And it would really be nice to see this work also being published. I think it's quite impressive, that you also see that there's efforts and work that is being done from the scientific side, and Yeah. So, but then quick question, you indicated that there's inland water provisioning that you're now exploring. And I was wondering if you've made efforts to test the water quality of this inland water and even see how it is being affected by the lake itself, perhaps maybe through seepage or what, I don't know. So what is the water quality like? And maybe, just to try and understand the effects, the ripple effects of the lake, even with underground water on the animals as well, still, Yeah, thanks.
Should I take that, Goza?
Yeah, it's okay.
So I'll speak to some of the tests that we did for our domestic water for the park. We do make use of boreholes for domestic water supply, and we're also making use of these boreholes for wildlife, for game water supply. So when we tested our boreholes, they were safe for human consumption. They met they met the whole requirements for drinking water. So it then turns out that our water, it's not, how can I best say it? There is what do you call those underground crevices? The name just escaped my mind. But it's not coming from directly seepage, but as though it's an aquifer. Good. It's a separate aquifer that is fed from the mountains, not from the lake. So our water is not seepage from lake water. It is coming from and it is an aquifer being fed by runoff and water from the nearby mountain range. So in a way, our water is safe for wildlife and drinking, the one that we drill with the bores, depending where the siting of the bores is. But definitely there are those concerns when it comes to areas that are close to the lake shore for seepage and the likes.
Thank you. There are so many questions, but I think time is not kind to us, unfortunately. So one more question from the various questions we received. Is there any possibility of tracing the direct impacts of pollution on aquatic plants and other plants in the riparian zone?
Can I take it there?
Yes, and that'll be our final question for the day.
Yeah, thank you. Looking at the aquatic plants and riparian plants, as I mentioned before, that we were checking on our invasive species, and we noticed that some of the oxygen weed is now disappearing in Chivero. We used to have a problem around our bay, and nowadays, as we are doing the water quality sampling with Emma, we've got 20 points which we do water quality assessment. So we use the retina sampler. As we use the retina sampler, we also check the weeds which are around that area, because our retina sampler, when it goes down, it comes up with some of the weeds which will be there. And we are noticing that in some areas, there is nothing like oxygen weed. And oxygen weed is associated with clean water, and it doesn't tolerate polluted water. So we are saying there is a possibility we can do the measurements, we can trace it during those surveys on invasive species, mostly on invasive species. And most of the plant species which are found here, these are the oxygen weed, and also we have got the riparian weeds which we find here. They have not been affected, the riparian plants. Instead, they have benefited from the nutrients, because we are saying the lower lake level has reduced. As it reduces, it leaves them out with less disturbance, but leaving some nutrients. So they are multiplying in on the periphery of the lake. But looking at the aquatic plants now, we have got we no longer have much of oxygen. We had 3 types of oxygen which we're finding, which we're seeing in the lake, but nowadays there is less of oxygen. So that's another possibility, tracing on the impact. Looking at the population of it, though we do not have people on the ground who are doing much on those aquatic plants, and we are also encouraging, since we have got people from the institutes we can do also the survey on the aquatic plants and the riparian plants. I think that's what I can say on this side.
Okay. And then
Can
final
I add
question.
on to that?
Sorry?
Can I add on
final
to
question.
that?
Yes.
Sorry?
I'd like to add on what Goza was saying.
Yes.
Because if you go back into Eastern Chivero, you will find that submerged plants are those which grow like water lilies, and it talks about auction weight. I think it's talking about lagarosiphon, one of the lagarosiphon species. Those plants which grow from the ground and are submerged within the water, basically in waters like Lake Chivero, because of the um, uh, the algae and this turbidity, they cannot first photosynthesize to grow effectively from the bottom attached and grow, and so they'll virtually be wiped out from such a kind of a water. They require water where light can get to the what we call the photic zone and grow from the bottom. So yes, it's correct. Most of the plants that grow submerged will actually tend to be wiped out in a waters like Lake Chivero. You are gonna get floating weeds, floating plants like the water hyacinth and others that are hardy and can live in such waters. So what you are gonna see is that most submerged plants basically are not there, and that's also a concern because they provide habitat for other living organisms. So that means that there are other living organisms that are also being wiped out in such kind of an environment. So it's a vicious cycle in terms of the biodiversity of the system itself. Yeah, so it's a concern if you look at a whole picture in terms of the types of living organisms you can see within such an environment. Okay, thank you.
Hello, Diana. If you could answer this question, yes, your hand is up, Diana.
Oh, okay. Sorry, it wasn't for this. I just seen there were quite a number of questions when it pertains to are the fish safe.
Yes.
So we are yet to do tests for this year. We're waiting for the rainy season to pass. But from the tests that were done by the Ministry of Health last year, and the year before, the ones that we mentioned, the test results did show that some of the fish tested positive for, I think I mentioned it, Vibrio cholerae, and then cyanobacteria and some heavy metals as well. But then it's also important to note that when it comes to cyanobacteria, especially with what I'd mentioned, not all spots around the lake are positive for the bacteria, for the toxins. You may have cyanobacteria, but you may not have the toxins. But then it's difficult to know, and obviously fish move around. So it's not recommended because there is a risk, a serious risk to health for the fish. I don't know if that answers it because of the water that they are exposed to.
Okay. Thank you for that one, Diana. There was another question as well, just asking whether or not the deaths are seasonal. I'm sure you could type out a response on that one while we work on concluding the meeting, because what I can see is that this is an issue which is very topical. And I believe that we could get even up to 7 p.m. simply discussing about Lake Chivero. And I would like to be the cruel one. You can stone me if you can, but I'm happy that our meeting is virtual. And that won't be very possible. We'd like to conclude today's meeting and once again thank David and Diana for their insightful presentation and the hard work that they continue to do in our beloved Lake Chivero. Now, for those of us that are remaining, thank you very much, guys. Now, on the 30th of April, we will be going into the Parks and Wildlife Amendment Act. We're going to have a deep dive into the Parks and Wildlife Amendment Act, and our presenter is Professor Patience Gandiwa. She is a highly experienced conservationist, world-renowned, and has done outstanding work and leadership in conservation science and even in the policy space at both local and global levels. Her dedication and her leadership have been far-reaching, and she's received several awards, several accolades to that effect. And she will be talking to us about the Parks and Wildlife Amendment Act and what it means for Zimbabwe. So let us stay tuned. Let's continue to stay updated on our socials. And we can also subscribe to the ZimParks newsletter, and we can get constant updates from there to make sure that we don't miss out on the next webinar and several others that will be taking place during the course of the year. Thank you very much to everyone that came out today. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Team.
Thank you.